It's been 2 years since the U.S.-led coalition began its airstrikes against ISIL. The armed group has lost some ground in Syria and Iraq, but it's far from being defeated. So, can airstrikes alone defeat ISIL, and what else can be done? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle, Carey. In August of 2014, the United States and its coalition partners began an air campaign against ISIL in Iraq and Syria. The armed group's rapid rise and expansion have made the 5-year war in Syria that much more complicated. There have been victories and defeats along the way for all involved. But what is clear is that ISIL is still a powerful opponent. The U.S.-led coalition says it has launched nearly 15,000 strikes against the armed group since it began its campaign. It says the coalition has significantly diminished ISIL's territory since then. The watchdog groups say the airstrikes have also killed hundreds of civilians and have largely failed to stop the expansion of ISIL within Iraq and Syria. So let's take a look at how ISIL's territory has changed since the airstrikes began. In 2014, the fighters controlled land across Iraq and Syria with thin stretches of road connecting the cities they held. Now, ISIL holds more isolated pockets of land, but it has strengthened its territory near Aleppo and Mosul, and it's extended towards Damascus. U.S. President Barack Obama says ISIL is changing its strategy as the U.S.-led coalition makes gains.
ISIL has not had a major successful offensive operation in either Syria or Iraq in a full year. Even ISIL's leaders know they're going to keep losing. In their message to followers, they're increasingly acknowledging that they may lose Mosul and Raqqa. And ISIL is right. They will lose them. And we'll keep hitting them and pushing them back and driving them out until they do. Even as we need to crush ISIL on the battlefield, their military defeat will not be enough. So long as their twisted ideology persists and drives people to violence, then groups like ISIL will keep emerging. And the international community will continue to be at risk in getting sucked into the kind of global whack-a-mole where we're always reacting to the latest threat or lone actor.
So let's bring in our guests now for today's discussion. In Amman, Mouyad Windawi, fellow at the Iraqi Center for Strategic Studies. In Washington, Hardin Lang, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. And in London, Matthew Glanville, former British Army soldier and advisor to the Iraqi, Afghan, and U.S. governments. And welcome to all of you. Mouyad, I'd like to start with you. Clearly, ISIL is losing territory in Iraq and in Syria. Let's talk first about what is working for the coalition in Iraq.
From the beginning, we agreed that only airstrikes was not enough. Thank God to the statement issued by Ayatollah Sistani for jihad. Then thousands of Shiite militia start to form the so-called popular mobilization. Also, the Iranian guess how much this dangerous situation might affecting their friends in Baghdad, the Shiite government. So the Iranian pass a lot of their generals and passage fighters. Also, they increase their supported militia in Iraq. Those we call them the Iraqi-backed Iranian militias, backed by the Iranian government. So the Iraqi forces at that moment already collapsed, lost a lot of their American-supplied equipment. But the reality is just simple, as I am saying now, is that when Daesh arrived, the Sunni community, which all their areas became under their control, from day one, Daesh exercised their terror. This new maniac, the Sunni community discovered they are destroying their mosque, their heritage, and killing them in a very savage way. So from day one, we thought that the Sunni will never be happy with these people. The questions from that time is what after Daesh. This is what is concerning me, since we are only in a few months coming, Daesh will be outside Iraq. The question is what after Daesh? yes, it's true, the airstrikes was effective, but also did a lot of this destructions of Sunnis area. The Shiites took the opportunity and also start to be in Sunnis area side by side with the Iraqi forces, led by Iranian generals like General Qasem Soleimani. And here the question is, we are going to see Sunni communities, cities, all in all, distracted. We have over 3.5 million as a displaced people, thousands of widows.
Mr. Windawi, if I could...
The government in Baghdad...
If I can get in for just
yes,
a moment, you brought up a lot of points that we're going to revisit. If I could just for a moment bring Hardin Lang into the conversation. Hardin, weigh in on anything that Mr. Windawi has said, but also talk about what has been working in Syria, because I know the situations are not the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the situation in Iraq, where we've actually seen some significant progress on the ground militarily, isn't mirrored by that kind of commensurate progress in the situation in Syria. In Iraq, again, it's not just the airstrikes that have made a difference militarily. You know, there are over 5,000 U.S. troops at the moment in Iraq, which are both advising and assisting Iraqi troops as well as training, and they're getting increasingly close to the front line in the conduct of these operations, not just with the Iraqi security forces, but also with the Kurdish Peshmerga in the north. And you can see as we sort of move towards this final major military operation in Mosul, that this role will probably intensify to sort of plug the capability gaps in the Iraqi security forces. But again, in Iraq, for a moment, while we have seen progress on the ground militarily, your other guest just raises some excellent points about the day after Daesh, what comes next. The fact that we've seen half the country liberated from ISIL, or half the territory they used to control, is impressive. But if we put that against the number of internally displaced by the crisis, that number has been rising and is now around 3.3 to 3.4 million. And it will probably go up as we move into the operation of Mosul. And that tells you something about the sort of disequilibrium still in Iraqi society. So much more needs to be done to meet the needs of communities, the immediate needs of communities that have been liberated from the Islamic State. But then looking forward, there's a much bigger role for politics here in terms of giving these Sunni Arab communities in Iraq a stake in the future of the country. Pivoting then over to the Syrian side, you know, the numbers will tell you that roughly 20% of Islamic State territory has been liberated, you know, since the inception of the campaign a couple of years ago. The airstrikes have been reasonably effective, but there it's really been a question of finding partners who are capable on the ground militarily. We're seeing some progress in the Manbij Cap, which is this area along the border in Turkey that needs to be closed in order to cut off the lifeline between the Islamic State and external flows coming in from Turkey. And that's impressive. But the political situation inside of Syria is no closer to any kind of serious resolution. And so it's very hard to see how that side of the conflict ends anytime soon.
Matthew, how is it different, the challenge for the coalition taking on a group like ISIL as opposed to a traditional army? There have been reports that the fighters often blend in with civilians. Talk more about what the challenges are.
Well, we see Islamic State in its own terms as a state with a formed army, but actually it should be thought of more as a very, very overgrown and very sophisticated terrorist organization. So Islamic State uses a combination of military and terrorist techniques that makes it very, very difficult to target for a conventional military. So whilst we think about airstrikes and we see images of, in particular the north of Iraq, of sort of formed lines of trenches between the Peshmerga and Islamic State, much of the action is much more akin to the American military activities in Baghdad in the 2000s. It's fighting people who do blend in with the local population, fighting people who, in many cases, have the sympathy of the local population. I mean, some Sunni communities do still see Islamic State as a legitimate manifestation of Sunni grievances. It's probably the minority, but it does still happen. So trying to fight Islamic State because of the way that it operates requires genuine local forces and genuine local engagement, which is why, as your other contributor said, the 5,000 American soldiers are not necessarily there directly on the front line. They're sort of one step back directing the fighting, because international troops don't have the level of local understanding and knowledge to fight an enemy like Islamic State that is so capable at blending into the local terrain and the local population.
So yeah, tell us more about, Matthew, about the things that are happening behind the scenes that we don't see. We hear about airstrikes. That's the most high profile thing. But clearly there must be other tactics, other strategies at play.
Well, there are. There'll be a whole panoply of ISTAR assets, which are intelligence and surveillance gathering assets, that will be deployed by international troops. There will be training, there will be logistics, there will be the supply of ammunition and weapons. I know, for example, that the British Army was supplying heavy machine guns and training to Peshmerga forces. So whilst we see airstrikes, footage of airstrikes, that's only the tip of a much wider operation. And most of the drone and aircraft activity that takes place will actually be about developing an intelligence picture rather than necessarily dropping bombs. The fighting that you see is the minority of activity, and the rest of the international support will be around developing this intelligence picture and building the capacity of the Iraqi army and the related Shia militias.
All right. Mr. Windawi, let's talk about, we've talked about that there has been some loss of territory. There's also been a significant loss in oil revenues that ISIL has had access to. How does that change things for them?
Yes, thanks to the international coalition, because they targeted their wealth institutions, no matter what it is, mainly the oil fields. But still Daesh has some few oil fields in hands, maybe in Mosul, and it will be taken sooner or later. So they are trying with this tax system keep their finance going on. Also, they reduced their monthly payments to their fighters, no matter they are foreigners or Iraqi, to less than half what they were paying at the 2014. This issue is not concerning us at the moment as monitoring the situation.
All right. Hardin, you referenced Mosul earlier. What happens if Mosul is retaken from ISIL?
Just before we get into that, let me just touch upon the last topic here.
Sure.
With respect to the wealth that ISIS gets from its oil, the extraction of oil and selling of black market oil, that's a big part of the problem. But equally, if not bigger part of the problem in terms of a revenue stream, comes from extortion of the local population. And so our understanding of this, like looking back over last fall, for example, the coalition began to take a much more sort of robust and aggressive posture in terms of airstrikes against petroleum targets last fall, like in September, October, November, and it showed dividends on the ground in terms of the revenue stream to ISIL. However, ISIL extracts a tremendous amount of its rent and revenue through extortion from the local population. And while they control still large population centers like Mosul, that's going to be an issue going forward. Now, coming to Mosul, if you're actually, this is a complicated situation. I was based in Mosul in 2003 and 2004, and taking the city is going to be no easy feat. But if we can assume that they're actually able to do so, there's going to be a very critical moment in the wake of combat operations where the local population and then those who have been involved in the fighting, both the Peshmerga on the Kurdish side and the Iraqi security forces, are going to have to make some hard decisions about how the city is going to be governed. We've seen in other situations where that, like the political plan after the defeat of ISIL in a given geographic area hasn't been clear, and that's led to tension between different parts of the combatants, as well as slowed down the returns of Iraqis coming back into those cities to sort of normalize the situation. So I think there's going to be a lot of attention in the immediate wake, both of the humanitarian situation, which is probably going to be quite dire, and the political situation in terms of who really is in control of the city and what role for the different forces in terms of providing public security. From that point pivoting out, this is really going to be a moment where we're going to have to wrestle with some of the much bigger questions that haven't fully been tackled yet. The national sort of reconciliation strategy and plan that's been sort of articulated now for quite some time We haven't seen significant movement on that yet out of Baghdad. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the current, the Prime Minister Alawi isn't particularly strong. I mean, Prime Minister Abadi isn't particularly strong at the moment. And so his government really isn't in a position to move that forward. So big pieces of sort of the national reconciliation strategy, which are going to be core to long-term stability, are going to need to become sort of the main line of effort, if you will.
So, Matthew, when we talk about military strategy, it often seems that the political strategy is lagging behind when actually, should they not be parallel? Should these things not be happening at the same time?
They should be, but the Abadi government is weak and is unable to deploy significant military forces without significant US support. So they rely on the Shia popular mobilization units. And when they are involved in Sunni areas, as we saw with the retaking of Fallujah earlier this year, it creates very, very severe political problems. It allows the Islamic State to point at the Shia militias and say to Sunni populations, look, we told you this is an Iranian plot, these Shia militias are coming into Sunni areas. And it's absolutely crucial that when Mosul does fall, there is an organized, coherent Iraqi universalist government presence there. And in many ways, the American role, whilst providing military support, also has to force the Iraqi government along that road of national reconciliation, because a military solution alone will mean that something very much like Islamic State will manifest itself probably within a matter of months once Mosul is retaken.
Mr. Windawi, let's talk about the number of civilians that have been killed in airstrikes, both in Syria and in Iraq. How does that affect the situation? How does that build resentment in people? How does that make it difficult for the U.S. coalition to partner with people that they need?
In fact, there is no any formal actual numbers or given neither by anyone, even the Iraqi government. Even those monthly reports come by UNAMI Iraq, they are not really covering all the numbers of those killed or injured. And according to my account, since IS arrived till last month, we are talking over 200,000 killed or 200,000 killed or injured, over 5 million displaced people. In fact, the government is not willing to give such casualties since 2005. All the numbers hidden, there is no one release anything, but we could say that a lot of killing took place, even in Sunni Syria under the international coalition air strikes. No one would like to say how many civilians killed too. The problem is, I would like to refer to what my colleague said about reconciliation. Unfortunately, we are seeing at the moment the Shiite community doesn't like to go ahead with such a reconciliation. Let us go back to two topics took place recently by the Iraqi government. The first one is that the new formation of 120,000 Shiite militias will be attached to the regular forces. These are mostly Iranian-backed militia. These forces will be even stronger than Iraqi forces, which limited the influence of United States in Iraq politics. Also, de-Baathification issue, another law issued recently in Baghdad, and now they are trying to issue another law concerning justice and accountability. In fact, wherever we dig, we see there is no idea about how could be the national reconciliation or historical reconciliation. The last statement by the Security Council on 22 of July, the last statement by Jan Kobic, the special envoy to the UN Security Council on 17th of July, both of them talk about reconciliation, but in fact, no plan for that.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to bring Matthew into this conversation. Matthew, when the United States has a new president elected in November, but taking office in January, obviously, how might that affect the strategy going forward for the U.S. coalition, depending on who the president is? I mean, how important is there for there to be some sort of continuity?
Continuity is vital. I mean, part of the reason that Islamic State appeared on the horizon in 2013, 2014 so forcibly was that America had switched its attention from Iraq following the withdrawal of American forces in 2010 and 2011. And the Iraqi politics is difficult. It is a fragile democracy. And America and the wider international community, I think, has an obligation to maintain its focus on Iraq, to maintain aid and military training and expenditure, but also crucially to engage with Iraqi politicians and to try and help them through this reconciliation process, which will probably also require money and funding to be spent in Sunni areas. And continuity in American policy will be crucial whoever ends up being president.
What does success, Hardin, what is short of completely wiping out ISIL, what does success actually look like for the U.S. coalition, and how far away might that actually be? What could they call a success?
I think success would be a more stable Iraqi government with armed forces able to control the whole of Iraq, but I think we would see an endemic low level of terrorism within Iraq continuing, but it wouldn't be transnational terrorism of the kind that we see at the moment, because Islamic State wouldn't have the profile and the kudos that it does now.
Hardin, I'd like you to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it depends very much the theater that you're looking at. For the foreseeable future, again in Iraq, I think what Matthew just describes is a reasonably accurate picture of what success would look like. I think one has to assume, given the nature of the political and the economic crisis that is still sort of in Baghdad's in the throes of at the moment, it's going to be hard for them to make immediate progress on national reconciliation. So I think you see a two-track sort of medium to long-term process, or three tracks. One track is going to be an attempt to sort of re-energize slowly over time some form of reconciliation process, and that's probably going to involve a heavy international role, probably from the United States, hopefully from the Gulf at a certain point, but that's going to need to be brokered with some outside attention. The second piece is going to be some reconstruction in some of these communities that have been badly damaged, not just by the Islamic State, but by the campaign to free them. And then third, I think it's fair to assume that there's going to be sort of a low level of insurgency in a best case scenario in Iraq going forward as the Islamic State sort of reverts to its natural state, if you will. They sort of came up as a large sort of like terrorist guerrilla insurgency, and I would suspect that they're going to revert to those type of tactics fairly soon if they lose Mosul as their last piece of major geography. If you pivot to Syria, there really is right now no firm, clear picture of what success looks like. I mean, I think the best that can sort of be hoped for is significant progress against the Islamic State in that sort of like eastern pocket, northeastern pocket of Syria, and then perhaps a bit of a sort of cessation, or at least like a freezing in the sand of the conflict as it sort of grinds to a bit of a stasis, with the government controlling this, the government in Damascus controlling a good chunk of the country, but then also some opposition groups in a loosely knit confederation controlling areas in the north. I think the Islamic State there, again, will continue as a form of insurgency because there's not going to really be a clear glide path for a political solution anytime in the near future.
All right, Hardin.
And the final theater is really looking...
No, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead, quickly.
Is looking abroad at the other areas. So the Islamic State at this point now has a significant presence in Libya. They have affiliates in Egypt and in a couple of other areas. I mean, the numbers are quite high, but the question now is, to what extent will they really sort of pivot energy and enthusiasm and resources out to working with those affiliates, and how does the coalition begin to pivot itself to think about containing this? What we're seeing already in Libya is a move to deploy air assets again against the Islamic State. Whereas I think we've seen in Iraq and Syria,
I hate to interrupt, but
sufficient.
that's going to have to be the last word on this discussion. But thank you all so much for your insight on this discussion. Mr. Mouyad al-Windawi, Hardin Lang, and Matthew Glanville, thank you all for your time. And thank you for watching the program. You can visit our website anytime, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team, bye for now.